The Contingency Man, a story of precision, betrayal, and the architecture of reckoning. The most dangerous man in any room is not the loudest one. It's the one who came prepared. Part 1. The Text. My wife sent a message from Tokyo at 11:43 on a Wednesday night. I was at my desk in the home office on the 38th floor of the Meridian Tower, reading a procurement brief that needed my signature by morning. The phone lit up on the glass beside my coffee cup, and I picked it up the way you pick up any phone, without expectation, without armor. The ordinary reflex of a man who still believed on some level that the world had not yet decided to reorganize itself around his destruction. The message read, "Married Dominic last night. Thought you should hear it from me. Don't embarrass yourself by fighting it." There was a photograph attached. Elena in an ivory silk dress on a hotel rooftop, the lights of Tokyo spread behind her like a circuit board. Dominic Vane in a dark suit with his hand at her waist, and the expression of a man who has just taken something he'd been planning to take for a long time. They were both holding champagne flutes. They were both smiling. I looked at the photograph for a long moment, not because I was surprised. Something in my chest had been braced for impact for months, the way a structure braces for a load it knows is coming, even if it doesn't know the exact hour. I was studying the image, the way I study any document before I respond to it, looking for the details, memorizing them, noting what they confirmed and what they revealed. I set the phone face down on the desk. I finished reading the procurement brief. I signed it and placed it in the outbox. Then I picked up the phone and typed my reply. Noted. Congratulations. I sent it. I set the phone down, and then I opened the encrypted drive on my laptop and navigated to the folder I had labeled 18 months ago with a single word, contingency. It was not empty. It had never been empty. I had been building it since the evening I found a room receipt in the lining of Elena's travel bag, a receipt from the Shin Marinucci Hotel in Tokyo, dated for a weekend she had told me she spent at a design conference in Singapore. One receipt. That was all it took to activate something in me that I can only describe as a switch. Not rage, not grief. A switch. The kind that once flipped does not flip back. My name is Sebastian Crane. I am 51 years old. I am the founder and executive chairman of Crane Capital Partners, a private equity firm headquartered in Chicago, with satellite offices in New York, London, and Singapore. We manage $14 billion in assets across infrastructure, technology, and healthcare. I did not inherit this. I did not marry into it. I built it from a single fund, a single investor, and a single bet on a toll road in Indiana that paid out at 300% over 7 years. And I used that return to build the next thing and the next and the next, until the thing I had built was large enough that its shadow fell across an entire industry. I tell you this not to establish superiority, but to establish context, because what happened next was not the story of a powerful man crushing two small people with the weight of his resources. It was the story of a man who spent 49 years building things carefully, who made one careless decision about who he trusted, and who spent 18 months correcting that decision with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. The careless decision was introducing Elena to Dominic Vane. Elena Sorrell Crane, 43 years old. Architectural designer of significant reputation. She had studios in Chicago and Milan, a client list that included 3 of the wealthiest families in Europe, and a profile in the kind of magazines that sit on coffee tables in offices where serious decisions are made. I had met her at a gallery opening in Paris 11 years ago. She was standing in front of a Kiefer painting, not looking at it the way people look at art. They're trying to appear to appreciate, but actually looking at it, the specific intensity of someone translating what they see into something they can use. I had fallen in love with that quality before I fell in love with anything else about her. We married after 2 years. We built a life in Chicago with winters in Milan and springs in Tokyo, which she loved the way certain people love a city that doesn't know them yet. We had no children, a decision we had made together clearly and without resentment, because Elena's work was her child, and I respected that with the same completeness that I respected everything about her, or thought I did. Dominic Vane, 45 years old, managing partner of Vane Architecture Group, a firm that had been struggling until Elena began referring clients to him 3 years ago. I had met him at a firm dinner I hosted to welcome a new addition to our portfolio company's board. I introduced them. I shook his hand. I told him Elena was extraordinary, which she was, and watched him agree with the precision of a man who had already made his own assessment and was simply confirming it for the record. That dinner was 18 months before the text from Tokyo. I know now, having built the folder one document at a time, that within 6 weeks of that dinner, Dominic Vane had called Elena 7 times on her personal number. Within 3 months, they were meeting for lunches that appeared on her calendar as client development. Within 6 months, the hotel receipts began. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened in the 4 hours after I received the text. Part 2, the folder. I want to be precise about what happened in those 4 hours because people make assumptions about a man in my position. They assume fury or collapse or the bottle or the phone call to the lawyer made in the hot blood of a fresh wound. None of that. What I did was work. I opened the contingency folder and I worked through it the way I work through any closeout process, methodically, without sentiment, checking each item against its status and moving to the next. The joint brokerage account had been restructured 3 weeks earlier after Garrett Wills, my CFO, and the man I trusted with everything that mattered operationally, had flagged an anomaly in the household account audit that I had asked him to run. The anomaly was a pattern of wire transfers over 14 months amounts between $8,000 and $45,000, all routed to an LLC called Sorrel Creative Partners. I had searched the LLC. It was registered in Delaware with a registered agent firm and no public principals. What I had found through a contact in the state attorney's office, a woman named Patricia Osei, who owed me nothing and told me the truth because that is who she is, was that the beneficial owner of Sorrel Creative Partners was listed in the operating agreement as Elena Sorrel Crane and Dominic James Vane jointly. Elena had been funneling our joint capital into a shared entity with the man she was planning to leave me for. Not impulsively, not in the fog of passion. With an operating agreement, a registered agent, and 14 months of consistent execution. I had moved the brokerage assets the following week. Not emptied, restructured in a manner that was legally defensible under our prenuptial agreement's asset protection provisions, which my attorney Marcus Webb had drafted 11 years ago with the kind of thoroughness that felt excessive at the time and now felt like prophecy. The joint account was flagged under the spousal asset protection clause. Elena's access to the Crane Capital expense account was suspended. The biometric entry profile for the Meridian Tower penthouse, her facial scan, her fingerprint registry, her key fob code had been purged from the building's security system 2 days ago, not tonight. I had known this was coming. I had simply not known the exact evening it would arrive. By midnight, I had completed the financial closeout that I had been preparing in stages over 3 weeks. Not because I was angry, because a man who builds things carefully does not dismantle them carelessly, even under duress. The documentation was already complete. The prenuptial infidelity clause was airtight, negotiated at the insistence of my father, who had spent 35 years in commercial litigation and believed that the most romantic thing a man could do for a woman was be honest with her in writing before the wedding. Elena had reviewed it with her own attorney, who had advised her it was enforceable. She had signed it. At 12:45, I called Marcus Webb on his cell phone. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. I had briefed him 3 weeks ago that a situation was developing and to keep his calendar available. That is the kind of attorney Marcus Webb is. He doesn't waste time asking why you're calling at midnight when you told him 3 weeks ago to keep his phone on. She sent a text, I said, from Tokyo. Yes, there's a photograph. Send it to my secure line. A pause. The prenup. Full infidelity clause. The Sorrel Creative Partners entity is documented. The wire transfers are documented. The hotel records going back 16 months are documented. Then we're ready, Marcus said. I'll have the filing prepared by 7. One more thing. Her father called me last night. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Before or after the text? Before. He asked me how I was. He said he had something he needed to show me. Another pause, longer this time. Sebastian, if Victor Sorrel is calling you voluntarily the night before his daughter sends that text, I know what it means, I said. I told him to come to the office Thursday morning. Good. Marcus's voice was steady and calibrated. Get some sleep. I slept 4 hours. I have not needed more than that in a decade. My body understands the difference between rest and avoidance, and it takes exactly what it needs. Part 3. The Family. I was up at 5:30. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, made a double espresso in the kitchen, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass that looked south over the city toward the lake. Chicago in November is a specific thing, gray and cold and entirely serious about itself. The kind of city that doesn't apologize for its weather because it never promised you anything. I have always found November clarifying. The security app on my tablet showed 2 rejected entry attempts from Elena's biometric profile logged at 2:17 and 3:41 in the morning, the timestamps already added to the contingency folder. She had tried to come back to an apartment she no longer had access to, which told me the text had been sent in a version of confidence that the overnight hours had begun to erode. I pulled up the full contingency folder. 41 documents. The first was the hotel receipt from the Shin Marinauchi, photographed and dated the evening I found it. The last was the photograph from the text downloaded and time-stamped as document 41 at 11:46 the previous night. In between were 16 months of patient assembly, the LLC registration documents from Delaware, the operating agreement obtained through Patricia Osei's contact network, the forensic audit. Garrett had prepared the location cross-referencing from Elena's cloud account, which she had forgotten was mirrored to the household network through an agreement we had signed 4 years ago when I had set up the home office system, the hotel records from Chicago, Tokyo, and Milan, the wire transfer logs, and a background report on Dominic Vane that I had commissioned 8 months ago through an investigator who had no connection to anyone in my professional circle. The background report was the document I returned to most often in the months of silence that followed my discovery of it. Dominic Vane had built his architectural firm on a specific foundation proximity to people with resources and access to clients through those people, before Elena. There had been 2 other professional relationships of unusual intimacy, a real estate developer named Claire Ashworth in Boston, and a procurement executive named Sunita Mehta in Singapore. Both women were married. Both women had referred significant business to Vane Architecture Group during their respective relationships with Dominic. Claire Ashworth's marriage had ended 18 months after she began referring clients. Sunita Mehta's marriage was under legal challenge when Dominic moved from Singapore to Chicago, which was when he entered Elena's orbit. He was not a man in love. He was a man with a methodology. I had sat with this knowledge for 8 months without saying a word because saying a word was not the correct move. The correct move was to document and wait and be ready, and I had done all 3. My phone rang at 7:15. The number on the screen was one I recognized as my son's Theo, 26 years old, working as an associate at a consulting firm in New York, the product of my first marriage to a woman named Diana, who had died of an illness when Theo was 9 years old, and who I had loved with the kind of love that doesn't have a category for replacement. Theo had Elena's number in his phone because she had been his stepmother for 9 years and had treated him in the early years with a genuine warmth that I had believed was permanent. Dad? His voice had the tight quality it gets when he is managing something large. I saw something on social media this morning. A photo. Mom, Elena. He corrected himself without dwelling on it. In Tokyo. I know, I said. I got a text last night. She texted you. What did she say? She informed me, I replied. A pause. What did you reply? Noted. Congratulations. Theo was quiet for a moment. Dad, I'm fine, Theo. I've been preparing for this for some time. How long? 18 months. A longer silence. Theo was his mother's child in many ways, precise, emotionally intelligent, capable of sitting with difficult information without immediately trying to resolve it. What do you need from me? Stay available. Stay quiet. Let Marcus handle the legal mechanics. I paused. There's one more thing I want you to know. The man she married, Dominic Vane, has done this before. Not to me specifically, to other families. He finds proximity to people with resources and he uses it. He used Elena's referrals to rebuild a firm that was failing. And he used our marriage as cover while he planned a different future. Theo absorbed this in the way he absorbs difficult things fully without deflection. He used her too. In a different way than he used me, but yes. Does she know that? Not yet. I looked out at the lake. She will. The call with Theo lasted 11 minutes. After I ended it, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time looking south toward the lake. The city was fully awake now, the morning traffic building on Michigan Avenue, the delivery trucks. The particular rhythm of Chicago getting to work. I have always found this city's mornings clarifying in the way that certain honest things are clarifying. They don't comfort you. They simply show you clearly what is there. Theo had been 9 years old when his mother died. Diana Crane, née Holloway, who had been a structural engineer with the kind of mind that saw load-bearing problems where other people saw only aesthetics. She had been 41. The illness had taken 14 months from diagnosis to the morning I sat in a hospital room and held her hand while she stopped breathing. And those 14 months had been the defining period of my understanding of what love actually requires. Not proximity, not provision, not the maintenance of a certain standard of living, but the specific act of showing up to a thing that is painful and staying in it, without looking for the exit. I had stayed. I had brought Theo to school every morning for those 14 months, and picked him up every afternoon when I could, and arranged for people I trusted to cover when I couldn't. And I had sat at Diana's bedside on the evenings she was well enough to talk, and on the evenings she wasn't. And I had done all of this while managing a fund that was in the middle of its most critical growth period. And I tell you this not to claim virtue, but to establish that I know what it means to be present in the way that costs something. When Elena entered our lives 3 years after Diana died, when Theo was 12, she brought a quality of attention to him that I had not expected and could not have manufactured. She treated him not as a child to be managed or a complication to be navigated, but as a person whose opinions about things were worth hearing. She remembered what he told her. She followed up on things he had said the week before. She showed up to his school events when I was traveling, not because I asked her to, but because she had decided he deserved someone in the seats. Theo had not called her mother. Diana was his mother and always would be, but he had called her Elena in a tone of voice that meant something close to it. That was the Elena I had married. That was the woman I had believed I was building a life with. And that woman had been real. I was certain of that, as certain as I was of anything. What had happened was not that she had been a fiction. What had happened was that the real woman had been slowly replaced, or had slowly replaced herself, by a version that had decided certain things no longer mattered. And I had not been present enough in the marriage to see the replacement happening until the shape of the thing had already changed beyond recognition. I took responsibility for my portion of that. It would not have been honest not to. After the call, I sat at my desk and thought about Elena in a way I had been careful not to do during the 18 months of building the folder, not strategically, not as a subject of analysis, but honestly. I thought about the woman I had met in front of the Kiefer painting in Paris, about the specific quality of her attention, about the winters in Milan where she worked until 3 a.m. on a design she couldn't let go of, and I sat in the kitchen with coffee and waited for her, because I didn't want to be anywhere else. I thought about the slow cooling of those evenings, the gradual disappearance of that quality of attention, the way she had stopped asking what I was reading, and I had stopped asking what she was thinking, the ordinary drift of two people who had forgotten to keep choosing each other. I thought about my own part in that. I was not naive enough to construct a story in which I was purely a victim. A man who works 80 hours a week and travels 30 weeks a year and considers his work the primary evidence of his worth is not a man who is fully present in a marriage. I had loved Elena. I had loved her through my best available self. And my best available self had been increasingly partial in its attendance. But partial attendance is not a justification for what she had built inside our marriage, while I was paying the bills for it. Incompleteness in a marriage is a problem two people address together. It is not a license for what the folder documented. I closed the laptop and went to meet Victor Sorel. Part 4. The Father. Victor Sorel arrived at my office at 9 sharp, which was exactly what I expected from a man who had spent 30 years as a federal appellate judge, and before that, a decade as a federal prosecutor. He was 70 years old, lean and upright, with the kind of face that has been composed under pressure so many times that composure has become its natural resting state. He wore a dark overcoat and carried a leather briefcase that I recognized from the photograph on his office wall, the one from the year he clerked for a Supreme Court justice in the early 1980s. He shook my hand with a firm grip and sat down across from my desk, and set the briefcase on the table between us, and looked at me with the steadiness of a man who has decided what he is about to do and is no longer deliberating about it. "She sent the text," I said. "I know. She called me this morning from Tokyo." He folded his hands. "She was surprised that you replied the way you did." "What was she expecting?" "She didn't say, but she was expecting something other than 2 words and a period." He looked at me with an expression that was not quite a smile. "She underestimated you. She's always underestimated you, and I've never been able to understand why, because you have never given her a reason to." I let that sit for a moment. "You said you had something for me." Victor reached into the briefcase. He placed 3 things on the desk between us. The first was a leather-bound journal. The second was a printed document, 3 pages with handwritten annotations in the margins. The third was an envelope sealed with Elena's handwriting on the front addressed to Victor. "The journal has dated entries going back 22 months, he said. "I began keeping it when I noticed that Elena's calls to me were changing in character. She was asking questions she had never asked before about estate structures, about how marital assets are classified under Illinois law, about what a wife's legal exposure looks like if a business her husband co-signs for fails." And he looked at me steadily. "I am a federal judge. I know what those questions mean." I began writing things down. The printed document. A conversation I overheard at a family dinner 14 months ago. Elena and Dominic Vane were in the kitchen. I was in the hallway. I documented it the same evening, signed and dated it as a witnessed personal account. The substance of what I heard was a discussion about timing specifically, about when to move the assets into the Sorrel creative entity before filing, and how to ensure the filing came before you could challenge the transfer. I looked at the envelope, and the letter. Victor was quiet for a moment. "Elena wrote to me 4 months ago. She was asking for my advice on how to structure a personal trust that would receive transferred assets without triggering the prenuptial disclosure requirement. She presented it as a hypothetical." He looked at me. I kept the letter. I did not answer it. I looked at the 3 items on my desk for a long moment. Then I looked at Victor Sorrel, a man who had built his reputation on the premise that the truth does not change based on who it is inconvenient for, and who was now sitting across from me demonstrating that he believed this absolutely, even when the inconvenience was his own daughter. "Why?" I asked. It was the simplest version of the question. "Because she used a man who trusted her," he said. "And because she used him with planning and patience and the same intelligence I spent years hoping she would apply to things that deserved it." His voice was steady, but I could hear the cost underneath it. "I love my daughter Sebastian. I love her completely. But love is not the same as protection from consequence. I learned that on the bench 30 years ago, and I have not unlearned it. She'll know you were here. Yes. It will damage your relationship with her. Perhaps permanently." He held my gaze. "Do what's right with what I've given you. Win this cleanly." He closed the briefcase, stood, and shook my hand again. I watched him walk out of my office and thought about what it costs a man to do what he had just done, and about the particular kind of integrity that does not make exceptions for the people you love most. It is not a common quality. I had encountered it perhaps 4 times in my life. I intended to honor it. Part 5. The Wife He Left Behind. The call came at 10:30. The number on my screen showed a Chicago area code I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mr. Crane." A woman's voice controlled the voice of someone managing something very heavy with deliberate precision. "My name is Isabel Vane, Dominic's wife." I sat forward slightly. "Mrs. Vane. I've been in Chicago for 3 days. Dominic doesn't know." A pause. "I drove from Indianapolis. We have 2 daughters, 8 and 11. He told me 8 months ago that he was taking a long-term consulting engagement in Chicago and that we should stay in Indianapolis until he got settled. I believed him. And her voice tightened on the last three words in the way of someone who has stopped being angry about being foolish and started being practical about it. The mortgage payment on our house failed last month. When I called the bank, they told me the account had been restructured. I found out from our financial advisor that Dominic had redirected the account 3 months ago. How much? I asked. Everything liquid. About $240,000. A pause. I went through his home office. He has a laptop he keeps locked. He used our older daughter's middle name as the password. A brief exhalation, not quite a laugh. Inside was a shared folder. Mr. Crane, he and your wife have been planning this for 19 months. I have documentation. And I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Where are you now?" "In a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue." "Come to my office. I'll have the lobby expect you." She arrived 20 minutes later. Isabel Vane was 40 years old, dark-haired, composed in the specific way of someone who has been holding themselves together through will alone for weeks and has learned not to trust the composure entirely. She wore a gray wool coat. She carried a canvas tote bag with no visible brand, the bag of a woman who has not had time to think about accessories in a while. She shook my hand with a grip that was firm and held eye contact, and sat down without waiting to be invited, which told me everything I needed to know about the quality of the person I was dealing with. "I want to be direct," she said, setting the tote bag on the chair beside her. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because my daughters need their father held accountable, and I cannot do that without documentation I don't have on my own." She reached into the bag and produced a flash drive. She placed it on the desk between us. 19 months of correspondence between Dominic and your wife, she said. Planning documents, financial projections, a timeline with target dates, a budget for a property in Kyoto that they apparently intended to purchase after the assets cleared. "Mandin one size." She pushed the drive an inch closer to me. The budget line item for their down payment is labeled SC Guarantee Proceeds. SC is Sebastian Crane. He planned to use the funds from your business guarantee as his contribution to their new life. The room was very quiet. I looked at the drive for a moment, then picked it up. "Isabel," I said, "this needs to go through my attorney before we discuss it further. His name is Marcus Webb. I want to handle it correctly so it's fully admissible." I paused. "But I want you to understand something. What's on this drive? Combined with what I've been building for 18 months, this is comprehensive. This is not just a domestic matter. This is coordinated financial fraud." "I know." She looked at me directly. "My attorney in Indianapolis said the same thing. She said it should go to the state attorney's office as well as the family court." I called Marcus into the office. He reviewed the drive for 25 minutes. When he came back, his expression had the particular calibration of a man who is genuinely impressed and is containing it professionally. "The timeline document alone," he said quietly, setting the drive on the desk, "establishes premeditation at a level that changes the nature of every related proceeding. Combined with the Sorrel Creative Entity documents and the wire transfer logs, we are no longer talking about an infidelity case with a prenuptial clause. We are talking about coordinated asset diversion with a documented third-party co-conspirator." Isabel looked at me across the desk. "What happens now?" "Now we do this correctly," I said. "Every step, every filing, every document handled properly so that nothing is challengeable." I looked at her steadily. "Your daughters are going to be all right. Whatever Dominic has taken there are legal instruments that will recover it or hold him accountable for it. You have documentation, and you have standing, and you have a family law attorney who knows what she's doing." She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone receiving something they had given up expecting. Then she nodded once, stood, and shook my hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time. I thought about two women who had trusted the same man for different reasons, and at different depths, and about the particular asymmetry of what he had taken from each of them. From Elena, he had taken a direction she hadn't found on her own. From Isabel, he had taken a decade of ordinary life, the mortgage, the daughter's school schedule, the weekend plans, the assumption that tomorrow would resemble today in the ways that mattered. The second theft was larger. The first one hurt more to think about. 47 documents, one folder, 18 months of patience. I want to say something about patience because people misunderstand what it means in a context like this. Patience is not the same as inaction. It is not the suppression of fury in service of a plan. It is the recognition that the most effective response to a threat is a complete response, and that completeness requires time. A man who acts on the first evidence destroys the evidence. A man who acts on the 47th document destroys the argument. I had built my career on this principle. Every fund I had ever raised had been preceded by months of documentation that turned a thesis into a case. Every acquisition I had ever made had been preceded by due diligence that would have looked to an outside observer like excessive caution and had looked in the outcome like exactly the right amount of care. The contingency folder was simply due diligence applied to the most important asset I had ever been wrong about. And I had been wrong about Elena. Not entirely. I do not believe that the woman I married was a fiction, but I had been wrong about the durability of what we had wrong about whether the distance I had allowed to develop between us was temporary friction or permanent drift, wrong about the degree to which a person who feels unseen will eventually find another way to be seen. These were my errors, and I owned them. They did not change the nature of what she had built inside the marriage with Dominic Vane, but they were part of the complete accounting. And I was interested in the complete accounting, not the version that was easiest to carry. I had started the folder with one receipt. I was closing it with 47 documents and a civil action and a prenuptial clause that would hold in any court in Illinois. The distance between those two things was not talent, it was patience. And the decision made in the hallway, with a blazer in my hands, and a receipt in its pocket that I would understand what I was dealing with before I dealt with it. I added the flash drive from Isabel Vane to the contingency folder as Document 47. Then I called Garrett Wills and asked him to prepare a full forensic trace of every wire from the joint accounts for the last 24 months. Part 6, the Gala. The Chicago Infrastructure Innovation Gala was held on a Friday evening at the Arts Club on Ontario Street, a room that smells of oak paneling and serious conversation, and the particular restraint of old Chicago money that has learned to be comfortable without announcing itself. Elena and I had co-sponsored this event for 6 consecutive years. Her name was on the donor acknowledgement alongside mine in a program that 200 of the most consequential people in the city's infrastructure and development world would handle that evening. I arrived alone. I wore the dark suit she had once said made me look like a man who had decided something. I wore it deliberately. The evening proceeded with the choreography of these events, cocktails, introductions, the navigation of a room full of people who are simultaneously pursuing things and pretending to be simply attending. I moved through it with the ease of someone who has been doing this for 20 years. I shook the right hands, said the calibrated things, kept my expression pleasant, and my posture unhurried. The whispers began within the first 30 minutes. I caught fragments at the edges of conversations. Tokyo Elena Dominic Vane married. Did you hear? I did not slow my stride or change my expression. Let them talk. In a room like this, information is currency, and I had spent mine carefully. The story that was traveling through the cocktail hour was the story I needed to travel. Halfway through dinner, a business journalist I recognized from a publication that covered private equity with unusual precision approached my table. He came with a recorder already in his hand and the expression of a man who believes he is about to get a quote that will make his week. He sat without being invited. "Mr. Crane," he said, "would you care to comment on the reports about your wife and the ceremony in Tokyo?" I set down my fork. I folded my hands on the table. I let my voice carry to the 2 tables nearest me because I had chosen this table for exactly that reason. Elena had a significant evening in Tokyo, I said. I was in Chicago reviewing a procurement brief. Some of us build things during the week. I picked up my fork. That's all I have for you. He sat for 4 seconds, uncertain whether he had a quote or a dismissal. Then he nodded and left. The table nearest me went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then conversation resumed louder than before. By morning, that exchange would have completed a circuit through every relevant network in the city. I had counted on it. After dinner, the director of donor relations approached me with a clipboard and a carefully composed expression. Mr. Crane, for the program update next year, will we be listing both names? I took the pen she offered. I drew a clean line through Elena's name on the listing form. I handed it back. Full listing under Crane this year, I said. Single entry. She took the form without comment, though something registered in her eyes. The particular acknowledgement of a woman who has seen power exercised and is noting the manner of it. I turned and walked to the terrace. The city was doing what Chicago does on cold November nights, absolutely refusing to be anything other than itself. The wind off the lake, the skyline in its undemonstrative brilliance, the traffic on Michigan Avenue indifferent to everything happening 40 floors above it. I pressed 2 fingers against the terrace railing and thought about Dominic Vane, somewhere in Tokyo, probably believing that the hardest part was behind him. He was wrong. The hardest part was just beginning. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, Nevada, filing reviewed. Jurisdictional challenge upheld. Their motion is dead. I read it once. I pocketed the phone. I went back inside and spent the next 40 minutes being the most composed person at the gala, which, as it turned out, was exactly what I needed to be, and exactly what I was. Part 7, The Reckoning. 3 days after the gala, Elena called me directly. It was the first time she had used my number since the text. I answered on the 3rd ring, not the first, not the last. Sebastian. Her voice had a different quality than it had in Tokyo. The confidence was still there, but it was working harder than it should have needed to. I think we should talk, without the lawyers. My attorney has advised against that, I said. I'm not asking your attorney, I'm asking you. A pause. We were married for 9 years. We can have a conversation. I thought about it for a moment. Not because I was wavering, I was not wavering, but because I owed the 9 years the courtesy of genuine consideration. There's nothing you can say to me that changes the documentation, I said finally. You understand that. I know. Her voice shifted slightly. Sebastian, I want you to know that it wasn't the way it looks, isn't... She stopped. Dominic told me you and I were finished, that you had checked out of the marriage years ago and were staying out of habit and convenience. He said you'd be relieved. I was quiet for a moment. And you believed him. I wanted to. The silence between us had the weight of something I could not name, and was not going to try to name on this phone call. Elena, I wasn't finished. I was partial. There's a difference. I kept my voice level. And that difference doesn't excuse what you built inside our marriage while I was paying for it. She didn't answer immediately. The Sorrel creative entity, I said. The wire transfers. The operating agreement with his name alongside yours. The mortgage pre-application for the Kyoto property. 19 months of planning. I let each item land at its own weight. That is not someone who wanted out of a marriage. That is someone who wanted the assets from a marriage and a different life at the same time. I know how it looks. It looks like what it was, I said, and it is fully documented. Another silence. His wife called you, didn't she? We met in my office. I heard Elena exhale slowly. There was something in it that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite calculation, but was in the territory between them. He didn't tell me about her, she said quietly, about Indianapolis, about what he did to her finances. I know. He told me they were separated. He was not separated. I paused. There are 2 daughters, 8 and 11. The silence after that was the longest of the call. When Elena spoke again, her voice had changed into something I hadn't heard since the early years of the marriage stripped down, without the professional armor that had accumulated over a decade of success and recognition. It was the voice of the woman in front of the Kiefer painting, the one who looked at things fully before she said anything about them. I didn't know about the daughters, she said. I swear to you I didn't know. I believe you, I said. It doesn't change the other things. I know. A pause. Sebastian, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, even if the answer is the worst possible one. Ask, was there a period where you knew the marriage was in trouble and chose not to address it? Not because you didn't care, but because the work was easier. I sat with that for a long time. The lake was visible through the window gray and honest in the November morning. Yes, I said. There were years where that was true. I should have told you when I first felt it changing, she said, instead of finding something else. Yes, I said. You should have. I'm sorry, Sebastian, not for the legal record. As a person who loved you and handled it terribly. I received that, I said. I made a catastrophic mistake, she said. Not just legally, all of it. Yes, I said. You did. Is there... She stopped herself. Started again. Is there any version of this where we could... No, I said. There isn't. She was quiet. Then, because of what I did. Because of what you built, I said. There's a difference there too. I paused. I hope you find what you were looking for, Elena. I genuinely hope that. But you chose a man who has done this before, and will do it again, and the version of freedom you were imagining is not what he was selling. You'll understand that soon enough. I ended the call. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I went back to work. Part 8. The Courtroom. The hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday in December. Marcus had spent 3 weeks preparing the filing with the thoroughness of a man who believes every document will be examined and every detail will be tested. The filing included the full prenuptial agreement and infidelity clause, the forensic audit of the wire transfers. The Sorrel Creative LLC documents obtained through Patricia Osei's network. The location cross-referencing from Elena's cloud account, the hotel records from 16 months across 3 cities, Victor Sorrell's journal with its 22 months of dated entries, Victor's documented account of the overheard conversation at the family dinner, Elena's letter asking Victor about asset transfer without prenuptial disclosure, and the flash drive from Isabel Vane with the 19-month correspondence and the budget document listing SC guarantee proceeds as Dominic's funding source. 47 documents. 1 folder, 18 months of patience. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:45. Dark suit, no tie. Marcus met me in the lobby with his briefcase and the particular calm of a man who knows how a case is going to resolve before the proceedings open. Elena arrived 11 minutes later with her attorney, a woman named Christine Holst, who had a reputation for aggressive pre-hearing negotiation and a track record that had intimidated more than one opposing counsel into settlement. Elena wore a charcoal blazer and kept her eyes forward as she crossed the lobby. She did not look at me. Victor Sorrell arrived 2 minutes after Elena. He walked past her without stopping. She said his name once quietly. He did not slow his stride. He came to stand beside Marcus and me and set his briefcase on the bench beside us. Ready, I said. Been ready for 30 years, he said. The courtroom was small and deliberately unglamorous, fluorescent light pale wood paneling, the particular institutional smell of rooms where consequential things happen without drama. Judge Ann Weller presided. She had a reputation for reading case files the night before and tolerating no theater from either side. Marcus had specifically requested her assignment. Christine Holst opened with a motion to exclude the cloud account recordings, arguing unauthorized access. Marcus countered with the household network agreement signed 4 years ago that established shared device access across all linked accounts, a document bearing Elena's signature. Judge Weller reviewed it for 80 seconds. Motion denied. The recordings were admitted. Holst's second motion challenged the prenuptial infidelity clause on the grounds that Elena had signed under professional pressure. Victor Sorrell was called to testify. He walked to the stand with the measured pace of a man who has testified in more consequential rooms than this one and knows that composure is not performance, but precision. He confirmed that he had reviewed the prenuptial agreement independently before Elena signed it. He confirmed that he had advised her of every term. He confirmed that she had signed voluntarily and with full understanding. He confirmed that 11 months before the Tokyo ceremony, he had overheard a conversation that indicated premeditation and that he had documented it the same evening. Christine Holst pressed him. Judge Sorrell, you are testifying against your own daughter. How do you explain that? Victor looked at her without any change of expression. The truth does not change based on who it is inconvenient for, he said. My daughter made choices. Those choices have consequences. I am not willing to stand in the way of those consequences. I spent 30 years on the bench applying that principle. I am not going to abandon it because the subject is someone I love. The courtroom was very quiet after that. Isabel Vane testified via video from Indianapolis, where her family law attorney sat beside her. She described the redirected mortgage account, the discovery of the flash drive, and the contents of the planning documents with the specific precision of a woman who has organized her grief into usable information. When she described the budget line item for the Kyoto property, the one labeled SC Guarantee Proceeds, Judge Weller made a note without looking up. By 11:45, Judge Weller had ruled. Full invocation of the prenuptial infidelity clause. Elena's claim to jointly held assets was nullified. The Sorrell Creative LLC was characterized as a fraudulent transfer vehicle, and the wire transfers were ordered to be reversed under the Marital Asset Protection Framework. A separate civil action against Dominic Vane for fraudulent misrepresentation in the business guarantee was referred to the Commercial Division, with the court's notation that the evidence of premeditation was substantial. Elena sat motionless. At one point she turned and looked at her father. He was already standing closing his briefcase. He did not look back. Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse into a gray December afternoon. Theo was waiting on the steps. He had taken the train from New York that morning without telling me he was coming. He shook Marcus's hand and then turned to me. He didn't say anything immediately. He put his hand on my shoulder and held it there for a moment, just that, and then dropped it. "Lunch," he said. "Somewhere quiet." "Yes," I said. We walked down the courthouse steps together. Dominic Vane had not appeared. His attorney had filed a notice of separate representation that morning, which Marcus had anticipated. The civil action would proceed on its own timeline. But the IRS flag that Garrett had identified in the financial records, the civil judgments from the Indianapolis mortgage default, Isabel's deposition, the flash drive, all of it was filed, all documented, all moving through the machinery of consequence at its own pace. He had borrowed my name, my money, and my trust. Now he had my attorneys. Part 9. What Remains. 3 months later, I was sitting in the lower bowl at Wrigley Field with Theo watching a spring training exhibition game that neither of us particularly cared about the outcome of. We had come because it was something to do outdoors in March, and because the particular quality of a baseball crowd, the low hum of several thousand people in simultaneous patience, was the right environment for the kind of conversation that doesn't need to announce itself. We had been to 2 games together when Theo was young, during the years after his mother died, when I had been trying to understand what fathering a grieving child looked like from the inside. I had not done it perfectly. I had done it with the resources I had available, which were considerable in some ways, and inadequate in others. And Theo had grown into someone who did not hold the inadequacies against me, which was a grace I had not earned and received gratefully. "She called me," Theo said, eyes on the field. He didn't specify who. He didn't need to. When, last week, she sounded smaller than I remembered, like something had changed inside the voice. He turned his program over in his hands. "She asked about you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were working." He paused. "Which is true. It's always true." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "She said Dominic had told her the Kyoto property was fully funded, that they had a life planned. She said when the money didn't come through, when the accounts were frozen and the civil judgment hit, he told her it was temporary, that he'd find another way." Theo looked at the field. "She said he found another way. A woman in London with a commercial real estate portfolio and a husband who travels a lot." I let that settle without comment. Dominic Vane did not change his methodology because a methodology had stopped working once. He moved to the next access point and began again. That was the architecture of what he was. "How is she?" I asked. "She's in a sublet in Milan, working. She lost 2 major clients when the court record became public. The names came out through the civil filing. She's rebuilding." Theo paused. "She asked me to tell you she's sorry, not for the legal record, just as a person." I watched the pitcher wind up on the field below. "Strike 1. "Noted," I said. Theo glanced at me. "Just noted." "What else should it be?" He thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe something." I sat with that for a moment. The crowd around us hummed in its patient way. The field was green in the early March light, absurdly green for a city that had spent 5 months under winter. "Tell her I received it," I said finally. Tell her I hope the work goes well." Theo nodded. He handed me a soda he had bought without asking whether I wanted one, a particular kind of attention that does not announce itself and is worth more than it seems. We watched the next 3 innings without talking much, which was the right amount. The civil case against Dominic Vane was resolved 4 months later. The commercial division found sufficient cause on 12 counts of fraudulent misrepresentation across 3 documented relationships, including the business guarantee. The IRS collection proceeding had attached to his liquid assets earlier in the year. The Kyoto property had never closed. The mortgage lender had withdrawn pre-approval when the civil judgment surfaced during the title review. Isabel Vane had filed for divorce in Indianapolis, and the family court there had issued an emergency support order that recovered a portion of the redirected mortgage funds. 2 of Dominic's Chicago clients had joined the civil action as co-plaintiffs after the flash drive documents became part of the public record. Vane Architecture Group's operating license in Illinois was suspended pending the resolution of the fraud findings. He had run an elaborate operation across 4 cities and 3 marriages and had ended up, as of the last report I received from Marcus, renting a furnished apartment in a part of London where the streets are indifferent to a man's former reputation. Elena returned to Chicago in June. I learned this from Patricia Osi, who mentioned it without context. In a call about an unrelated matter, the way people mention things, they believe you have a right to know without characterizing what you should do with the information. Elena had taken a studio on the north side. She was working again a residential project for a family in Evanston that a former colleague had brought to her during the months when most of the professional calls had stopped coming. One project small, requiring the specific quality of attention she had always brought to things that deserved it. I did not contact her. She did not contact me. There was nothing to say that had not already been said in courtrooms and documents, and the long administrative language of consequence, and the things that could not be said in any of those languages were not things the present moment had room for. Theo told me 4 months after she returned that she had asked again whether there was any scenario in which we might have a conversation. Not about the marriage that was finished, and she understood it was finished. About the years, the good ones. About whether 2 people who had meant something to each other could eventually occupy the same city without the weight of it being unbearable. I told Theo to tell her that the city was large enough. It was not reconciliation. It was not closure. It was something more provisional and more honest than either of those things. The acknowledgement that 26 years of a shared life, even a life that had ended in betrayal, had contained things that were real and did not become unreal because of how they ended. I was not ready to see her. I did not know when I would be ready. But I was no longer interested in being unreachable, and that was something, and it was enough for now. Part 10, The Foundation. Victor Sorrell called me on a Sunday morning in September, 10 months after the hearing. He called on his personal number, not his assistant's line, which told me this was not a professional matter. I answered, and heard the particular quality of his voice that I had come to associate with the calls he made when he needed to speak to someone who understood the specific weight of a difficult decision lived with over time. "How are you, Sebastian?" he asked. "Better," I said. "Genuinely better." "Good." A pause. "The same, I think." He was quiet for a moment. "She called me last week. Elena." "I know." Theo mentioned. "She asked whether she could come and see me." Another pause. I told her yes. I looked out at the lake through the window. November again, the lake the color it turns in late autumn. A deep green-gray that is beautiful in the specific way of things that are not trying to be beautiful. "I'm glad," I said and meant it. "I told her what I told you in your office," Victor said, "that love and protection from consequence are not the same thing, that I acted as I did because I believed it was right, not because I stopped loving her." A pause. She listened. She cried. She asked me if I thought she could rebuild her reputation. "What did you tell her?" I told her that reputation is the last thing to rebuild, that what she needs to rebuild first is her own accounting of what happened and why, without the version of it that casts Dominic as the architect and herself as merely influenced. He paused. I told her that she made choices, specific choices over time with full use of her intelligence, and that understanding that fully not as punishment, but as information, is the beginning of being someone who won't make those choices again. I was quiet for a moment. That's honest advice. It's the only kind I know how to give. He paused. Sebastian, I want to ask you something. Not as a father seeking leniency for his daughter, as a man who respects what you've built and how you've handled yourself through this. Ask, are you done? Is this finished for you personally? Not legally, I understand the civil proceedings have their own momentum. But you, as a man, is there peace in it? I sat with the question for a moment, not performing consideration, but actually considering. I thought about the 47 documents. I thought about the 4 hours after the text. I thought about the gala and the line drawn through her name on the donor form and the exchange with the journalist that had traveled through the networks by morning. I thought about Theo's hand on my shoulder outside the courthouse and the soda he handed me without asking, and the spring game at Wrigley in the cold March light. I thought about Elena in front of the Kiefer painting in Paris 22 years ago, looking at it with the specific intensity of someone translating what they see into something they can use, and about the particular quality of that attention, and how completely I had loved it, and how long it had taken me to understand that love is not enough to keep a thing alive if only one person is tending it. Yes, I said. I think so. Good. Victor's voice had the quality of a man who has set something down. You did the right thing, Sebastian. Every step. I had good company, I said. Yours particularly. We talked for another 12 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of this. A book he had been reading, a change in the weather, a restaurant near his apartment on the north side that he had discovered and thought I should try. It was the most ordinary conversation I had ever had with a man who had sacrificed something significant for the sake of something he believed was right, and it was worth every minute of it. After the call, I sat at my desk and looked at the lake for a long time. Then I opened a new file on the encrypted drive, not contingency, something else. I labeled it simply Next. I did not yet know what the next thing would be. I knew it would be built carefully with the attention of someone who has learned that the most important structures are the ones you inhabit, not the ones you display. I knew it would take time. I was not afraid of time. I had learned how to use it. Garrett knocked on the office door at noon. The infrastructure fund review is ready when you are, he said. The Korea project is looking strong. Give me 10 minutes, I said. He nodded and closed the door. I turned back to the window. The lake was the color of November, honest, unglamorous, entirely itself. The kind of thing that doesn't apologize for its nature and doesn't change its character based on who is watching. I had always loved this lake. I had chosen this city when I could have chosen any city because of this quality in it. This refusal to be anything other than what it was. I thought this is enough. Not everything I expected, not the life I designed, but honest and mine and built with my own hands on ground that I had tested and found solid. Then I straightened my jacket, picked up the fund review, and went back to work. Because that is what you do when you are a man who builds things. You keep building. Not because you have forgotten the thing that was lost, because you know more clearly than you ever did before what the building is for. Epilogue. 14 months after the hearing, Crane Capital Partners closed its largest infrastructure fund, to date $6.2 billion. The capstone of a 18-month raise that had proceeded entirely through the period of the divorce proceedings and the civil litigation and the public record and the whispers at galas. The close was covered in 2 industry publications. Marcus Webb sent me a bottle of bourbon with a note that said, "Simply told you." Garrett booked a dinner for the full team at a restaurant downtown, where we filled half the dining room and drank more than was perhaps strictly professional, and made noise that the other guests tolerated with good humor, because it was the kind of noise that comes from people who have earned something together. Theo flew in from New York for the dinner. He sat beside me and asked the questions he always asked about the numbers, about the team, about what came next, and listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who is genuinely interested and not performing interest. He had been offered a partnership track position at his firm. He was deliberating. Take it, I told him. Why? Because you're ready, and because the version of you that doesn't take it because you're not sure you're ready will be worse to live with than the version that takes it and finds out. He thought about that. Then he smiled his mother's smile, the one I had not stopped seeing in him for 17 years. Okay, he said. Isabel Vane sent me a card. Handwritten, no return address on the envelope, just a Chicago postmark. She had relocated to Chicago the previous spring, which I had not known. She had taken a nursing position at a children's hospital on the north side. Her daughters were settled in a school she described as good. She wrote, "Thank you for doing this correctly. It made everything else possible for us. I have not heard from Dominic in 6 months. I think he has finally understood that this particular story is finished." I put the card in a drawer. Not the contingency folder, a different drawer, the kind where things go that you want to keep but don't need to organize. Victor Sorrell and I had dinner twice in the months that followed. Once at the restaurant he had mentioned on the phone in September, a small Italian place on the north side with good wine and no pretension. Once at my office, working through a financial literacy program he was developing for his literacy nonprofit that needed a capital structure and a board member with experience in fund management. I joined the board. It was the kind of work that does not make the industry publications, but makes the city slightly more like what a city should be. And that seemed like the right use of what I had built. Elena opened a second studio in Chicago in the spring. I learned this from Patricia Osei, who mentioned it the same way she had mentioned Elena's return as information without characterization. The studio was on the west side in a neighborhood that had been changing for years, and was finally becoming what it had always had the potential to be. The project she was working on was a community center. She had taken it at a reduced fee. I did not contact her. She did not contact me. The city, as I had told Theo to tell her, was large enough. But one evening in June, walking back from a meeting on Michigan Avenue, through a neighborhood that had been built and rebuilt 3 times in the century, I had studied the city's history. I passed the window of a gallery and saw a woman standing inside in front of a painting, not looking at it the way people look at art they're trying to appear to appreciate, but actually looking at it with the specific intensity of someone translating what they see into something they can use. I stopped for a moment. I looked at her through the glass. She did not see me. She was entirely in the painting in the way that certain people are entirely in the things they love, and whatever she was taking from it, she was going to carry somewhere and use, and that was who she had always been underneath everything that had happened to her and everything she had done. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I walked on. The city moved around me in its usual indifferent way, the cabs and the pedestrians, and the particular quality of a Chicago evening in June, warm and clear and entirely serious about itself. I thought about the painting she had been looking at when I first saw her 22 years ago in Paris. I thought about the things we had built together and the things we had failed to build and the specific cost of both. I thought about patience and documentation and the particular strength that comes not from never being hurt, but from deciding in advance that being hurt will not be the final word. Then I thought about the Korea project and the next fund and the board meeting at Victor's nonprofit on Thursday and Theo's partnership announcement and the city in November when the lake goes honest and gray and beautiful, and I thought there is still a great deal to build, and I am still here, and I know how. That was enough. That was it turned out more than enough. The most dangerous man in any room is not the loudest one. He is not the one with the sharpest suit or the largest number or the most impressive company under his name. He is the one who came prepared, who kept records, who built the folder 18 months before he needed it, who replied to a text from Maui with 2 words and a period and then opened his laptop and went to work, who understood, without needing to perform the understanding that what a man builds with his own hands on honest ground is not something that can be taken from him, only abandoned, and he had not abandoned it. He had never been in danger of abandoning it. He had simply been waiting for the record to reflect what was always true, that the ground was his, the work was his, and whatever came next would be built on it. He went back to work, because that is the only answer a man like this knows how to give to a world that has tried and failed to take from him the thing he built. Not the money, not the fund, not the assets protected by a prenuptial clause and 47 documents, and an appellate judge who chose truth over his own daughter. The thing that could not be documented or filed, or admitted into evidence, the knowledge quiet and absolute of exactly who he was when it mattered. No performance, no collapse. Just a man who built things carefully and did not walk away from what he had built. That was the foundation. That had always been the foundation. And on it, whatever came next would stand. That was enough. That had always been enough. The most prepared man in the room wins not because he is ruthless, but because he is honest with the evidence with himself, with the cost of what he has lost and the value of what remains. Sebastian Crane had paid that cost in full. Now he was free to build again. The end. Cast of characters. Sebastian Crane, founder and executive chairman of Crane Capital Partners, Chicago. 51. 14 billion under management. Built from one fund and one bet on an Indiana toll road. A man who expresses love through presence and protection, who learned that partial presence is not the same as absence, but is not the same as enough. Elena Sorrell Crane, architectural designer, Chicago and Milan. 43. Extraordinary professional reputation. Met Sebastian at a gallery in Paris and loved him with the full quality of her attention until the attention found somewhere else to go. Made choices she could not undo and lived with the full accounting of them. Dominic Vane, managing partner Vane Architecture Group. 45. A man with a methodology and no other reliable quality. Built 4 professional relationships on borrowed credibility and proximity to resources. Ended up with a furnished apartment in London and a name that would appear in commercial court records for the following decade. Theo Crane, Sebastian's son, 26. Associate at a consulting firm in New York. His mother's smile and his father's precision. Did not perform grief or loyalty, but provided both fully when they were needed. Victor Sorrell, Elena's father. 70. Former federal appellate judge, former federal prosecutor. 30 years of applying the principle that truth does not change based on who it is inconvenient for. Applied it one final time when it cost him the most. Isabel Vane, Dominic's wife, 40. Indianapolis, then Chicago. Drove 4 hours with a flash drive and 2 daughters, and the practical clarity of a woman who has run out of the luxury of hesitation. The most useful and the least celebrated person in the proceeding. Marcus Webb, Sebastian's attorney. The kind of lawyer who keeps his phone on when a client tells him to keep it on and does not ask why. Garrett Wills, Sebastian's CFO. Found the anomaly. Said nothing publicly. Prepared the forensic audit. The invisible infrastructure of the reckoning. Patricia Osei. Contact in the state attorney's office. Told Sebastian the truth because that is who she is. The best possible reason to know someone. Roy Building doorman, 30 years. 2 tours in Vietnam. Let nobody through that he had not cleared. The first and most reliable line of defense.